Hi, today's good person to know is Alan Rusbridger. He's editor for The Guardian, and this particular video is on why he chose to publish the Snowden story. Some argue that in the interest of national security it was an irresponsible thing to do. But was it? What motivated Alan to put his neck on the line? The government thought that The Guardian had between 30 and 40 documents, but they actually had 58,000 documents, and I think that's more than sufficient to be well informed of the facts. Alan says most people in the UK weren't aware of the level of surveillance that goes on, and with technology being ever prevalent in our lives, we should be aware of how it's used and monitored. He says the press should have the freedom to write about these things, and questioned if it was a matter of security or saving face, i.e. avoiding embarrassment. He says two things have to happen. New laws have to be introduced, as the current ones operate on the back of old analogue laws, and there has to be a central body that administers policy, and someone has to oversee that. Now, bearing in mind the story broke in June, Alan says Westminster didn't have anything to say until October, so they were effectively burying their head in the sand, but simultaneously saying we'll deal with it. He says the tracking devices, i.e. the mobiles, that we are only too happy to carry around with us, reveal a lot about us, and that it will have a huge impact on our future. It's because it uses the same network, and so spying has become that much more easier to do. He says we should assume that there is no such thing as confidential information, and as a direct result, Alan and his paper have changed the way they communicate on phones and email. Alan is a very courageous man who, in the interest of his readers, chose to stand against the establishment. But he's lucky he has the support of his trust, and it's no surprising The Guardian gets 90 million people looking at their site each month. I hope this video illustrates what it means to be in a senior position of authority, and that the duty that you have. You do have to take chances now and again, and usually they are well worth it. So I hope you enjoy this video, and thank you for watching.
The first meeting we had with the government, they said, we think you've got a lot of documents. We think we could have 30 or 40 documents. We have 58,000.
Whoa!
So I think the truth was that to begin with they had no idea what we had. You can understand that they were desperately concerned. Big picture of what technology can do in terms of keeping everybody in this room, everybody in this country under atomic surveillance was, I think, unknown by most people. The fact that all this infrastructure is piggybacking on private infrastructure, the extent to which the cryptology of the web itself has been damaged or broken, so that's the biggest about the future of the web. What that says about the future of digital innovation by Western companies, the future of international relations between countries, and in a democratic society, how are you going to keep control of these technologies, which are, as you say, useful for the spies, we understand that, but are potentially devastatingly menacing? Everyone tries to narrow the debate to a very narrow one between national security and privacy. It seems to me it's so much bigger than that. Should the press be free to write about these things? Yes or no? The first tempora story, which was about the British telecom companies, so we were negotiating with the government under threat of injunction, and I left out the names of the companies, and I don't know whether that was right or wrong.
Is that what they were asked to do?
That was unasked, so that wasn't these are the sort of difficult things that you're being asked to do. That actually wasn't, in my mind, a security question. It was an embarrassment question. Because if these companies are revealed to have taken part in these things, it's going to be an embarrassment for them. Before Facebook, before Twitter, during the first funding phase of Google, these were analog laws that have been stretched to adapt to the digital world. So I think Cameron and Craig and Miliband, if you speak to them privately, they say that there is going to have to be a point which we're going to have to debate this openly. I think they were going to do it after the next election. And the second bit that has to happen is you have to sort out the oversight. It's all very well to say journalists shouldn't be writing about this stuff. But there are serious balances which have to be made here between free speech and privacy, between about what's happening in these telecom companies, about the process by which these things are read. We have to discuss what metadata is, and whether that is the same as phone billing. What the analogue laws govern. To me, it's plainly not. So somebody has to oversee this, and at the moment it's Sir Malcolm Rifkin. And we have to decide whether Sir Malcolm Rifkin, not him personally, but whether his committee is adequate. We started writing that in June, and Westminster had nothing to say on the subject. Nothing to say on the subject until about October. But if you've got the political classes saying, actually, we don't want to discuss this, it's too hard, how can they simultaneously step forward and say, leave it to us, we'll look after the oversight, and by the way, you should be writing one story where they begged us not to use, which we did use, and the Economist wrote a very good leader saying this was the most important story of all. It's about how the trapdoors were put into the web by the NSA.
So that's how they then access your
Listen to someone like Tim Berners-Lee, who built the web, and who understands these things. He regards this as absolutely disastrous for the future of the web. And the Economist saw that and said that was the most important story of all. The data that is contained in these tracking devices that we all willingly carry around with us, and what that reveals about us, and the degree to which the brain and the computer are now linked, and what happens when you put a filter between the brain and the computer. These are huge issues that are going to affect everything to do with commerce, business life, information about our health, and spying. And they're all incredibly interlinked because they're all using the same networks. So this is going to be a very, very big debate over the coming years. And spying is going to be one bit of it. Every journalist should assume that there is no such thing as confidential digital communication. So therefore, none of us have confidential sources. And if we're telling our sources that we will keep them confidential, and we don't understand the technology, then we're being really irresponsible. Anybody who's working on stuff with delicate sources, and you'll see we now publish our public GPTKs, and we change the way that we can talk on phones, we change the way that we use email. I'm not saying we're good enough, we're not good enough, but I think we're further down the road than what I see the majority does. I think people looked at that story and thought that's what journalism is supposed to be, that's what a newspaper is supposed to do. I think it just changed the perception. I think in terms of saying something about a paper rather than just buying it said, this is a paper that stands for these kinds of things, and actually this is why we went into journalism to do this kind of stuff. And there were two beautiful things about this during this phase. One was that there were explicit attempts to novelty. And I was able to just say, sorry, don't talk to me, talk to the Scott Trust. And then Liz Ford was able to write a letter saying, I'm sorry, we can't influence the editor in any way. So there was no way of noveling it. So that's a brilliant thing about the Scott Trust. But the other brilliant thing about a trust is that it can say, we can take a 10-year view of the revolution that's going through the industry. The future guidance is clearly global, because 2/3 of our readership is now abroad. We've got 90 million people come to the Guardian site every month. But we're up there now